Hey there, everyone. I just want to give a brief background to this interview. Hopefully, you watched the video I made on Steven Kubacki's Disappearance. In it, I cover some correspondence between Dylan Quarles, Steven Kubacki, and myself. It was around that time I inquired about their willingness to get on camera and answer some questions about the book, Steven's work, and his life before and after the disappearance. They graciously accepted, along with some caveats regarding what we were allowed to talk about. Two big takeaways I had from this interview. One, some people tell me it looks like I film in a sauna. Well, it certainly felt like it on the day of the interview. It was scorching hot. I'll be investing in some air conditioning shortly, but until that time, enjoy watching me melt. Second takeaway, I was anticipating coming away from this interview and feeling reinforced in my own opinion on Kubacki's disappearance. That did not happen. Not only did I find that certain facts, albeit small, were completely wrong, but I got the impression that Steven really went through something traumatic. I don't know, it's difficult for me to put into words. Whatever you believe about Steven's disappearance, I think he probably has a very interesting story to tell with his book, which was recently renamed The Disappearance of Steven Kubacki. Overall, I found both Steven and Dylan to be intelligent, kind, and a joy to have a conversation with. It was a good bit of fun, and I hope you'll feel the same way about it.
My name is Dylan Quarles. I'm an author and a publisher, and you can find my books on Amazon or in your local bookstore. And I'm predominantly known for the Ruins of Mars trilogy, which is science fiction set in the not too distant future with a healthy dose of ancient aliens and adventure. But lately, I have been making waves with a little series that I've been putting out called A Secret History of Port Townsend. That's where I'm from, is Port Townsend, Washington. It's kind of a haunted little Victorian seaport here on the Salish Sea, and there's a lot of lore and myth and legend. And I'm adding to it by writing this anthology of horror short stories, and they've been selling really well because I guess a lot of people come to Port Townsend and the impression is made, and they've been scooping these books up. So that's kind of what I'm doing these days. And obviously, working with Steve on his book
Right.
should have led with that.
Right. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I
Well,
couldn't have done it without Dylan. Dylan was, instrumental in all that and all the happening in writing the book. So thank you.
we'll get into that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you wouldn't
Yeah, my
mind.
name is Steven Kubacki. Let's see. I have a master's in linguistics. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. Right now, I'm just doing private practice. So I see mostly adults and couples. Time ago, I used to work with children and adolescents. Uh, Before that, I was a professor for many years at few different universities, taught at the doctoral level. And yeah, I have a book that's completed called My Disappearance, The Disappearance, and yeah, hoping to get that out. Let me see if people are interested in finding out more about that and me. I do have a website, stevenkubacki.com. People want to look into it. And
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
going to be doing a lot of posting on that. I have a lot of things that I also have been writing across a whole variety of different subjects, which I guess we'll probably get into.
Let me just make it clear to the audience right off the bat here that we had a prior agreement that we are not going to discuss directly the events of Steven's disappearance. And so I'm not going to be asking him any questions that would basically expose anything that's going to be in the book they're going to be releasing. But with that said, I just want a quick yes or no question from you, Stephen.
Sure.
In 1979, you told reporters you had amnesia after you returned after about
Yeah.
14 months gone. And do you now remember what occurred during that time period?
Yeah, well, lots happened. One of the reasons why I didn't want to talk about things was I didn't want my life defined by that event. So actually, I had, movie producers contact me way back when, and I said no, I didn't want to be defined by that event. Yes.
Okay.
Since then, I have recalled and I do remember what's went on, and I have a pretty interesting story to tell about all that. In fact, a lot of my ideas and insights and many of the things I've been writing kind of have some of their roots during that time. So
awesome. Okay,
Well,
yeah.
and so many people that experienced what you did, Steve, like that missing gap, like have had their lives defined by when they spoke at the time. I mean, you
yeah,
could think about almost any one of these famous disappearances where the person ends up coming back. Their whole life gets opened up, not only to like ridicule, but it ends up being something very hard to get out from underneath if you ever want to move on. So it makes
yeah,
sense, at least
that's
as an
true.
outside observer. I'm not an impartial observer,
Right.
but I am an
Right.
outside
I
observer.
understand.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what I wanted to get into, but I knew I didn't want to be defined by that whole experience, though it's extremely important in my life and is.
You didn't want to be a Travis Walton or something,
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah,
or
Okay.
yeah.
right.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because I think a lot of people have often wondered, I guess you have quite a reputation for kind of not responding to any inquiries
That's
about
right.
the case, and you've been, but yeah, and there's your answer. I mean, I understand that completely because, I guess the moment you start talking about it, you're going to be fielding a lot more offers of people wanting you to talk about it more and more, and it's yeah, you've built a whole life that's not based around your disappearance, right?
Yeah, actually, when I was in graduate school, I have an interesting story for you. When I was in graduate school, I was a TA for a class, and my name appeared in a textbook, abnormal psychology. And somebody says, "Is that you?" And I'm there. What do you think it is? You think it's me? And of course, nobody would think it was me because here I am, PhD student. But how could it ever be me? So, but
That's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that
So I was actually into some textbooks. I don't know if it's been removed or not. I think most of
What was it? Wasn't it? It was for amnesia, right? You
yeah, it
were in
was
the
for
textbook
amnesia,
as like
which of
a.
course is actually not ethical or professional to diagnose somebody at a distance.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that was not a good thing they did.
that's great. That was actually one of my questions. I was totally curious about if you ever, because you got a doctorate in clinical psychology,
Right.
right? And your case, I would think, there you are sitting in class as like a psychological anomaly in a way.
Well, yeah, back then, there wasn't an internet back then. So, a lot of the stuff that comes out about me and all the speculation comes out a lot later. I mean, there wasn't YouTube, there wasn't an internet really back then. And so most things was, through hardback, through covers, through reading.
Interesting.
It is interesting to think about. Like, there must have been a group of people carrying the torch, though, in that pre-internet sense. Like meeting up, in like church basements to discuss these events, like used to happen with MUFON and stuff before the
Yeah.
internet. Like, your story had to be kept alive almost like word of mouth until then the consolidation of information and the accessing and all that like you can have nowadays.
Right.
Well, and what has that been like to kind of quietly watch from the background? As I mean, are you cognizant of all the stuff out there about you on the internet with videos, podcasts? There's been articles and tons of theories. How have you? You're like a living legend in a way, Do you?
I know. Well, I pretty much ignored it for the most part, and then when I decided with Dylan to start writing this book, then I got into a little more, and I was actually amazed how much was out there. I couldn't believe it what was out there. I mean, it's like I think recently, I don't know, we were looking at, TikTok as, I mean, without me doing anything, there's over 2 million hits on my name, which is like, what? Where did that come from?
It's crazy.
I didn't do anything, zero. So yeah, I was kind of flabbergasted by the whole thing to some degree. And it's really interesting, all the different speculations out there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see which ones are true and which ones are false, I guess, when the book comes out.
So open up the polls now, right? Start your betting, place your bets.
That's right. The bets. Yeah. Very funny.
This one's a little bit for me. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but I did want to start a little bit if I can, because I mean, as weird as it is, I've been spending a lot of time researching you. And there's certain things I can't find, and I don't know much about your early life. If you're willing to just talk for a little bit, I am curious a little bit about what your upbringing was like and your family and Deerfield Academy, all that stuff?
Right, yeah. So I was born in Chicopee, Massachusetts. I 1954, and we lived there for a few years. My father worked at a tire factory, Uniroyal. I think there no longer exist. And my mother worked, I think, in Spalding. It's kind of used to be a factory that produced like bowling balls and all kinds of things. So yeah, and had a number of kind of like surgeries growing up, some eye surgeries. My eyes kind of move a little bit funny still, and some other things, a hernia, and eventually moved to South Deerfield, Massachusetts. My parents bought a house, and then I lived there for the rest of my childhood and adolescence. And when I was in junior high, I was fairly rebellious in junior high and decided that I really wanted to go somewhere else. And I found out there was a prep school nearby called Deerfield Academy, and I decided, well, why not a heck and apply for it? So I did, and I got in. That was really cool. Yeah.
And it was like pretty
that really
exclusive
changed
place.
my life. Pardon?
That's what I thought. It's pretty exclusive,
Really
right?
exclusive
It's not
place,
It's
easy,
extremely
right?
exclusive.
No, not easy.
And you're looking at, I'm exaggerating here, but they've got like 20 clay tennis courts. They've got their own ice hockey ring. They've got Olympic-sized pools. They've got 2 or 3 giant gymnasiums. They've got 5 or 6 football fields, soccer fields. Now they have their own planetarium. They have a library.
And none of those buildings have your family's name on it either.
No,
So it's
no,
you getting in was not part of the normal way of that works.
Yeah, I was sort of, they, I guess, wanted to be generous to some poor people. And so they, and I was smart and I got it. But most of the people are there because they've got a lot of money. And also because their parents or some relative had also been at Deerfield.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so after Deerfield, you end up at Hope College. And while you're there, you're there for like a year, if I'm right, and then you head off to Germany. Is that about right?
I was there for 2 years.
2 years, okay.
And then I went to the University of Freiburg and studied psychology, Jungian psychology, and parapsychology. Parapsychology is like the study of ESP, and
that was a course there.
Yeah, it was very well known. It was kind of the center of all of Germany that focused on parapsychology. And I remember even presenting while I was there. A book had just come out by Carlos Castaneda, Journey of Ixtlan, and I presented that in class.
And it was like Hans Bender, who's like really famous parapsychologist.
Hans Bender and Erhard Bauer.
Yeah, they were involved in University of Freiburg, which anybody that is into parapsychology a little, you hear the name Hans Bender and you kind of like, he's kind of like considered fairly legit in terms of the study of these phenomenon, not very sensational.
Yeah, that's incredible. Did you always have an interest in Germany or Europe? Is that because that's kind of a big step to take at that young age?
Well, we had to study language. We had to have a language at Deerfield, and so I studied Latin, and then I studied German.
Okay.
Then the German at Hope College. I got into studying German there, and this one thing led to the next.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a little second, but when I was reading the police reports about you, there was an interesting blurb in there. One of your friends told police you had 1 girlfriend in Germany and 2 in France. Is that accurate?
I wished it was accurate. Sounds great to me. 2 in France. I did have a girlfriend in Germany. Yes.
Okay.
I would say a past girlfriend in Germany.
Okay.
Or a girlfriend in Germany.
And it's explored in the book, and it's very
girlfriends in France.
Awesome. Okay. I'm glad you're touching on all that stuff.
Yeah.
Very important stuff.
Yeah. That's the background.
Well, romance and falling in love, and that really does motivate us in lots of ways and how we are and behave in the world. I know it's motivated me throughout my life. So That's actually one of the things I've been writing about is on dating and relationships. I haven't put anything in the blog yet on my site yet about that, but
so after you come back to the US after spending a few years in Germany, do you remember how long had you been back before the disappearance?
Well, I say I came back, I think 72, 73. I think I came back in 72, 73, 72, 73. I came back in 1975. So 74 to 75. And went back to school, and then I quit for a while and traveled, and
It's all in the book. This part is cool too.
Really,
Really
it's
cool.
all more in the book. Anyway, so yeah, and then eventually, and then the disappearance occurred in, I forget even when.
Well,
77.
February, some 1978.
Right. Yeah. Well, that actually helps me, because part of this is like I'm curious to see how good my own research was, and I thought you had spent multiple years in Germany, but you spent 1 year in Germany and then you.
Oh, I went back again. I went.
That's
back.
the
went
thing.
back. Okay.
I did go back again
because I thought your mom said that you were calling her from Germany in 77.
That's probably true.
Okay.
I was back at another time in Germany. Yeah.
Okay.
Because you did your year of studying, then came back. Like you said, you mentioned you quit. In that period of quitting school, there's a big adventure that takes place, which does culminate in another return trip to Europe and Germany. Yeah, and true. Not want to give stuff away, but this is just timeline stuff. Yeah. But so there is a lot that happens.
I won't delve into that. I kind of have an idea of what you're talking about from some of your friends that talk to police, but I'm excited to hear about that. So we'll skip over the events of the disappearance. But I am curious, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I mean, in 1979, when you came back, were you a bit overwhelmed by the media response? Was it something you were expecting? What was that like?
I was extremely overwhelmed. Extremely.
And just moving on, because I don't want to dwell too long on the disappearance and stuff. Before you disappeared, if my research is right, you were a history major at Hope.
At one point, I was a history. I changed my major many, many times. So
tricky.
At one point, I was a history major.
Okay, and then when you come back, you get a degree in psychology.
No, when I come back, my bachelor's degree, which I finish after I reemerge, is in German studies.
Okay.
And then after that, I go back to, I do some other stuff. I worked at a money market fund for a while, and then I go back to school and German graduate school for a year and get a certification teaching German. And and then during that time, I decide to apply for a master's in linguistics.
So, well, I guess what I'm getting at is, did your disappearance have any effect on you wanting to get into psychology?
Not directly. Actually, I was never very interested in psychology as an individual.
Gotcha.
I was much more interested in larger issues: economics, politics, sociology, larger topics, not about individuals so much. Very interested in spirituality too. Yeah.
Always had this, like, looking through the notes and at all the conversations we've had in interviews, maybe it's looking back with the psychologist lens, but it seems like you were always really aware of how the people in your life, that are featured in the book, like kind of how they work and think. So I always wondered if that was like you looking back now with the hindsight that you have as a psychologist, or if that's just always something you were kind of innately capable of doing.
I think I was always psychologically minded. Actually, my senior year at Deerfield Academy, I did an independent study project where I was a volunteer at the Northampton Mental State Hospital in Massachusetts, which is, I don't think it's even shut down now. It's this huge Gothic structure, 4 stories high, and catacombs underneath, and they used to do psychosurgery and ECT there, and so I was a volunteer on one of the locked up wards with schizophrenics and bipolars, etc. So I've always had I've studied even before then a lot of Jung. I actually have read Freud in the original, not German, but read most of his works when I was at Deerfield. So I guess I always had an interest in psychology, but I never thought of like pursuing it. Maybe that would be a better answer.
Okay. And at what point did you come here to Seattle to start practicing?
Oh, well, that's a longer story. Well,
that's a longer story.
So I was getting my master's in linguistics. In the middle of the program, I went to Saudi Arabia for a year to make some money, and I taught officers in the Saudi Arabian National Guard for a corporation called the Venel, a little bit like Blackwater, maybe not quite so infamous. I didn't have anything to do. I was teaching English to the Saudi Arabian Guard. I didn't do any of that other stuff that goes on. I was just a teacher. But I taught there, and during my time there, I decided, well, I don't know if linguistics was just a little too cerebral, too little too intellectual, though I know I come across that way, and I wanted something that's more interactive with people. And so then I just thought about it, went through some graduate catalogs and said, yes, becoming a clinical psychologist, that'd be really cool. Right. And one of my other thoughts, you'll find this funny, was I got married at that time, and I was tired of my wife knowing more about emotions and running circles around me about emotions and communication. And I said, well, I'm gonna become a psychologist. So quite so inept. Now, are women still run circles around me? Yes, that goes without saying. But I'm not quite as clueless as I was before.
You just know what's happening to you while it's happening, which in some ways is maybe worse.
In some ways it's kind of worse. Yeah.
Dylan, I kind of want to know, now that we get a little more about Steven's background, what was your life work experience like that led you up to the moment you met Steven?
I went to film school. I'll keep it really short. And while I was there, I really loved storytelling and all that stuff. But when I graduated and moved to South Korea, I lost my creative network. So I began writing to continue telling stories because I didn't have, actors and producers and just creative people around me who wanted to do fun things. When I was in Korea, I began working on a novel, my first novel, Ruins of Mars. And it's an adventure story, and it's about, exploring ruins on Mars, as the title might suggest. But the series gets really, to borrow a word from Steve, it gets cerebral, and it gets very kind of not high concept, but it gets kind of metaphysical as it goes. And so when I put that book out, and it became weirdly successful, there was a lot happening at the time. Curiosity Rover, Andy Weir's book, and the film were all so Mars was really on the zeitgeist. And put the book out, was working on the second, and I got a message from Steve, who had read it and was like, I like what you're doing here. And we just sort of struck up a conversation because I was really early in my author career. Now, if somebody emailed me out of the blue, I just ignore them. No, I'm just kidding. But it was back to, I was like, hey, this person is neat and they want to talk, and I'll talk. So we just sort of struck up a friendship. And as went on, he let me know, what his profession was. But more than that, Steve, I don't want to speak for you, but like Steve has a lot of knowledge in terms of it's a loaded term. Shamanic is what's the term you prefer? More kind of metaphysical, multiversey,
multi-dimensional, interdimensional experiences and travel or journey.
Right. Exactly. And a lot of that happens in the Ruins of Mars series as it goes on, because interacting with these alien ruins is like doing things to the explorers. So we started workshopping, bouncing ideas, because Steve's like, he knows a lot about this stuff, and practically, not just intellectually. So that's where our friendship developed. And I had no idea about the Disappearance at all. I wrote all the Ruins of Mars and most of the way into my fourth novel before my wife, who was doing a little bit of work for Steve on a book that he should talk about that he put out. She was doing some editing. She had a dream about him. She's a lucid dreamer. So she has some experience with some of the stuff that Steve also has experience with in terms of higher levels of consciousness and actually putting it into practice. She had a strange dream about Steve. She contacted Steve about the dream. And you gave her this. She said, "I had a dream about you, and you were a monk, and you were asking for my help. And have you ever been a monk?" And you said something to the effect of like, "No, but times I've never been a monk," or something along those lines. But times are not linear in the dream world. And it was this very Steve kind of answer. And so what didn't satisfy her, all that to say. And so she Googled him, and I'd never done that. I never thought to do that. I mean, I don't typically Google people who I strike up a friendship with, but maybe I should start. And she Googled Steve, and she texted me at work, like, "You have no idea, your friend Steve is the center of this like huge unsolved mystery and all these conspiracy theories. And I'm what I call a harmless conspiracy theorist, like ancient aliens and UFOs and sort of time travel and stuff. Like, I don't get into the stuff that it leads to storming of capitals and other things like that. I get into like the stuff that would make for a fun book, a novel someday. So when I find out that this friend of mine is like at the center of one of these types of conspiracies, I was just like floored. And the next time we got together, I asked him about it, and he told me, and that was like even crazier. Like, he just, we just started to talk about it.
Okay, but put me in the room there. Like, how, you have a friend, he has this a crazy event that happened in his life. You have not heard a word about it. How do you even broach that topic? Do you sit next to him and then all you said, let's talk about the 70s?
Basically, no, you're not wrong. It was a very, the words were kind of basically just spilling out of my mouth because I was so excited. And I'd been sitting in traffic before because I was coming to meet him in Seattle. Because I was like, I want to meet face to face. A lot of our stuff had been on the phone or emails or whatever, but we would occasionally get together face to face because I worked near where your office was, because we always meet up at this one bar and cafe. And I get down there, I sit down, and I just like, I just do it. And and then he just began to tell me a story that was certainly not anything I'd seen in all the YouTube videos that I'd watched leading up to getting there, or the articles I'd read. And when it was done, it was like, this needs to be a thing. But it's like, how do you, he's already shared so much and opened up. I didn't want to like push the issue, and then I didn't have to. So I was really fortunate in that respect.
So, Steven, given that story, how have you always been open with the people in your life about your disappearance if they ask you, or is it a topic you only broach if they ask you first? How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I generally talk about if it's broached, and then if I do, I've been generally pretty terse about it, because until meeting Dylan, I don't know, it just seemed to be when Dylan brought it up, it just seemed, well, I think it's time for it to come out. And I just saw his finding about it, his wife having the dream about the monks and other things that seemed all to make a lot of sense to me. And I said, okay, well, it must be the time.
Okay, so you being forthright with Dylan wasn't necessarily the norm.
No, not by any means.
Got you. Because I was going to ask if, in terms of family, even if did you ever keep your family apprised of your knowledge of what happened to you on any regular basis or anything like that?
Well, I'd rather not get into the whole family stuff.
No worries. So, Dylan, was it you who broached the topic of a book, or the other way around?
It was actually the other way around. He had told me the story, and then I think it was I was totally excited by the story, and then as he was telling me the story, like, other things started to kind of come up too, and then he said this would make a really great story, something to the effect like, it's like it was along these lines, this would make a great story. Someone should write it, or so now we just have to find someone to write it. And I think I literally just started pointing at myself, or I wish I knew a writer or something. So it was like probably a joke. I mean, knowing Steve, he's probably joking. I walk, it was a lead a horse to water situation, but I was thirsty. So yeah, I said, I'm a writer. And it took a long time even before the writing, though. I think from that moment, if I'm remembering correctly, right, Steve? Because there was
a while before we got going. Yeah,
because there was like, okay, once it's like, we're going to do this, then it's like, how, look at the scope, and how do you pick,
Right.
where do you start, and how do you pick what's important? And then we had to start doing like formal interviews, and like really getting things established, and before any kind of creative writing took to the page. So it was a process, just from saying it should be done to actually starting it.
So your approach was kind of, at least in the early stages, you would spend a lot of time interviewing Steven, not unlike this, I would imagine, and just kind of trying to get what you could out of him. And then is that because I'm kind of curious about how you guys work together on a book like this.
Well, luckily we had a friendship and a relationship, and there's a lot of trust there, because like, maybe you felt comfortable telling me the story, Steve, because I'd shared a lot with you. Like, a lot of my creative process is personal and is based in personal experience, like most artists, and writing is a form of art. So we already kind of had a good rapport, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I trusted Dylan unconditionally.
And we texted, and we had texted not even about the book, just other shit, like what's going on in your life, and just checking in. So I moved away from the Seattle area right before starting the book. So that's when the relationship moved from like meeting up semi-regularly to talk about my books, or, the conceptualizing the idea of Steve's book. So then it turned into a lot of like 2-hour long phone calls where we would just go over a portion of the timeline, and I'd ask questions, and then we talk about how we thought it would fit in with everything else. And how we wanted everything to connect, and would it be linear, non-linear? Because Steve's are really not super linear in any way, which is what's fascinating. When you start talking to him for a long time, there's lots of loops and parallel things. And
I can be fairly non-linear. I try to make my writing linear. So, but my writing is fairly linear, like the metamathematics of existence.
Yeah.
Throw out as linear as you get. It's, kind of like a journal article almost.
So is it fair to say that the book you guys are working on, it's maybe not done. Your average biography? Oh, it's done. Okay.
Oh, it's finished. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's all done.
All finished.
So tell your friends, especially if they're agents or publishers.
Yeah, right.
Gotcha.
StevenKubacki.com.
Right. We're looking for agents and publishers. That's true.
Yes. Yep. We're at that stage.
And Steven, you just brought up your monograph. I'm kind of curious. I read your monograph. We'll delve into that a little bit, but I'm kind of curious. Does the book at all incorporate the ideas in the monograph? Because I could see certain parallels there.
Yeah, there are things in the book that are, the monograph does connect to that to some degree.
Yeah, for sure.
But the monograph, is really based on 2 mathematical proofs that I developed with another mathematician, Brian Blackmore. A lot of the kind of the original thinking around all that goes way back when, also to the Disappearance. But the actual crafting of the mathematical proofs occurred later, though there was some of that already kind of going on.
They're really, really interesting. I honestly think it's worth, Steve, like expanding on the Gödel's theorem. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my questions. I mean, Gödel's. I mean, as best as you can.
Gödel.
Oh, Gödel.
Yeah, it's a G umlaut DEL, so it's Gödel.
That is true.
Oh.
Sorry,
I've been saying it wrong for so many years. You never corrected me.
Gödel.
I have heard, Gödel.
Gödel, yeah.
Well, I get, it's I read the monograph, and I'm not a big mathy type of guy or anything, but you don't necessarily need to be.
No, you don't.
It is accessible. You just have to. You have to really pay attention to what you're reading. You can't zone out, because there's a lot packed into a little in that monograph. But part of the basis for it is Gödel's 2 incompleteness theorems, and I don't know if you could try and simplify an explanation as best you could for the audience who may never have ever heard of that.
Yeah. Kurt Gödel was a contemporary of Einstein. And what he developed two mathematical theorems, one called the theorem of incompleteness and the theorem of inconsistency. The theorem of incompleteness says that in order that all things, ideas, theories, anything you can think about, realities, universes, are incomplete and insufficient. And because of this incompleteness, it is what drives change. That everything, there is no certainty, there's no absolute truth. So everything is incomplete, everything's changing. No matter what it is, there's no 100% certainty. So that's what Gödel argued, what he proved mathematically. Now, Einstein,
right, with this crazy, like, with this
very
huge equation,
kind of logic, very advanced kind of logic. And Einstein didn't like that because Einstein was very much a determinist and wanted certainty. His other proof is called a theorem of inconsistency, and that argues that that there are just inherent contradictions or inconsistencies in all ideas and theories and realities. So there's always things that just don't fit. And again, this is what propels change. Change is occurring because things are insufficient. If things weren't insufficient, then things would stay the same.
Right. And if things were inconsistent, you wouldn't suddenly have a fish decide to leave the water.
Right.
Even though that's inconsistent with its nature.
Right. So there's constantly change. And so then based on those two theorems, I thought, well, what if we take those ideas and kind of think of them, kind of take each idea of incompleteness and think of it infinitely, an infinite form of incompleteness. And that's where I came up with the theorem of totality, which argues that in order for anything to exist, everything imaginable and unimaginable must exist in some way. So it's kind of taking this idea of incompleteness and saying, well, if this universe is incomplete, then there's another universe, and that universe is incomplete, then there's another universe. And if you go infinitely like that, you would then have an infinite number of universes and realities, which actually supports the multiverse theory of existence, which is sort of the standard theory now in physics, that there are many, many universes. There are different types of the multiverse theory in astrophysics. Some there are fewer, some where they're infinite. But basically, my theorem, the theorem of totality, supports the multiverse theorem. And then to counterbalance that, we developed this theorem called the theorem of boundary conditions that says in order for anything to exist, it must have structure, it must have limitations and boundaries. So our universe has certain laws. You can't go faster than the speed of light. Pigs don't fly. Miracles aren't occurring every 5 minutes. Our world is not a fantasy novel because there's certain structures and laws. Now, all these structures and laws are probabilistic, so they can be broken or bent, which then helps which is why change then occurs and which makes our universe and our reality incomplete. I don't know if that helps.
No, it's heady stuff. I love it, and it definitely complements the book. It complements the project.
Yeah, that's right. So,
pay attention out there.
Right.
Take your notes.
Yeah. So that's kind of the science math side of me, you might say.
And and reading the book, I mean, I could relate to it in a number of ways, especially when you're talking, about boundaries and stuff, and that there are anomalies, though rare. Right. And, to me, part of what my channel is based around is, I mean, a lot of people think it's kind of a skeptical channel because I'm trying to prove there wasn't something paranormal happening or something or other. But I do believe there are instances, though very rare, where something completely anomalous does occur. And so am I right in assuming that kind of your theorem allows for the breaking of a boundary?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, so the theorem argues that everything is probabilistic. There is no certainty. So everything can be broken and bent. So there are connections between our universe and other universes or other dimensions. But what those connections are and how they happen, that is, to be determined. I think one of the things that happens that people get, actually, it's in one of my I have written another book that expands the metamathematics of existence. It's finished, but I haven't published it yet. It's called ReThinking Existence, the Multiverse, and God. And in there, I have just one of these little principles. It's called "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas," and that sounds kind of funny, but what happens oftentimes in the interdimensional or spiritual world stays there and is not transferable here. Otherwise, again, our world would be like a fantasy story. We'd be having miracles all the time. Doesn't mean that there isn't information or there isn't some connection or there aren't things happening from other universes and dimensions that affect us. But how they affect us, I think, are somewhat limited or in ways we just can't yet comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
What I find quite fascinating is how did you, I have my theories about this, but how did you get interested in this topic? I mean, it's quite a decision to kind of, at some point decide to tackle a subject as large as the, infinite mysteries of the universe.
Right.
How do you get there? Because when I look at, I mean, that is a hell of a work you produced, the monograph. And so I'm just wondering how did you get to that point? Because it is mind blowing in a way.
Yeah, I feel driven to explain things, and so what is existence is always, I've always been interested in kind of answering that throughout my life. So I've studied physics. In fact, when I was at Hope College, I was originally in pre-med and I was in honors physics, really loved physics. I studied a lot of astrophysics and try to understand quantum mechanics. And so I've always been fascinated in this area.
And non-ordinary realities and
non-ordinary realities
stuff.
And
some of that stuff from Castaneda, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
How that interplays.
Even the mathematics of it. I mean, it's not necessarily your average, high school mathematics in a way, right? I mean, you really delved into that aspect of it too. You wanted to prove this mathematically, right, as best you could.
I need to give Brian Blackmore a lot of the credit here. I know enough. I know a lot. I did really well in math, but the specific crafting of a lot of the stuff actually comes from Brian to a certain degree. He's the expert in the mathematics, and so he and I collaborated on that.
Is this something that an average person, is there something that they could apply here to their daily lives? Or I guess, why should your average person, want to look at this or be interested? Do you have any?
Well, no, it's a great question. I think what the theorem of totality says is that there are infinite number of possibilities that are around us, and so that we don't need to feel constrained or limited by who we think we are or what we are. That there are many avenues for us to expand and develop ideas and to have different experiences. So it's kind of arguing that there's these infinite possibilities. And so the question becomes, how do you take advantage of them? How do you access them? And so I think it helps create a sense of hope that, we're not constrained by things ultimately, that there are ways of exploring and developing new ideas and getting into new experiences. If the universe is, if we think of, there's an infinite number of universes and, there's this incredible complexity, all this stuff is sort of interconnected in some ways. And this may sound a little bit far afield, but when we look at the human emotion, love is all about expanding and accepting and connecting with things. And in some ways that kind of parallels the way existence is. Because existence is infinitely complex, and love is about connecting and expanding and enlarging your world. People who are in love always enlarge the world. They don't contract them, which is
they don't circle the wagons and kind of like harden into the beliefs.
Right. So positive emotions in general expand our worlds, whereas negative emotions contract them. So the positive emotions are more akin with the way the universe is. On the other hand, there are boundaries conditions, and the boundary conditions then force us to, deal with things as they are. And that's not a bad thing, because it's good to have boundaries, because then we can enjoy things. Like if everything was happening all at the same time, we wouldn't be able to enjoy a sunset. When I look at a sunset, it's a particular sunset. It's not 1,000 other kinds of sunsets. It's one sunset, and I can get into that one sunset because of the boundaries, because it is finite and it is what it is.
Right.
Sorry, I'm kind of rambling here a little.
No,
bit.
No.
It's that's just not something you hear every day. I mean, it's thought-provoking stuff.
Well, thank you.
And like Dylan yourself, what has been your experience with kind of wrapping your head around these ideas? Are you able to go toe to toe with Steven when talking about this kind of stuff? Because,
I wouldn't say toe to toe. I like to conceptualize a lot of these things because it's part of writing for me, at least, isn't necessarily about just raw creation. There's an element of intuition, and intuition often for me feels akin to deja vu in a way. So when I begin to explore a world that I'm, world building is the term people use for novel writing, but a world that I'm going to be utilizing in the novel, there's a feeling that a lot of it is already sort of there, and it's just up to me to describe it, or it's up to me to try to translate it, and then impose, whatever narrative arcs and stuff I want to have take place in this world, and dream up characters that may kind of already there. So like always already writing has been a bit of it's been about being in a non-ordinary state of consciousness to an extent. And that's what I love about it so much. And in my personal life and philosophically, we are very much in sync, Steve and I, about how some of these mechanics seem to work, or feel as if they're working. Again, it's like it's an intuitive thing. I've had a lot of non-ordinary experiences in terms of mind altering moments, consciousness altering shifts in perspective, however you want to say. And these things that happened with and without, Schedule 1 controlled substances. Make of that what you will. This is just who I am. This is how I've always been. So maybe this is part of the reason why when Steve and I initially made a connection, it was something that was pursued rather than just like, quick, thanks for your interest in the book. Part 2 will be out next year. It was like, something. So when Steve and I get in on these conversations, it's exhilarating because a lot of times it's putting, it's like, it's kind of bringing a lot of these big concepts that are rattling around down into like kind of making them a bit more condensed, or not condensed,
accessible to people,
accessible, and putting the language to it. It's succinct. That's the best word I could say. Yeah. So, and not talking about what's in the book, but talking about the process of writing the book. These conversations, like what we're having right now, were regular.
Yeah.
So make of that what you will. Yeah.
I think one of the things Dylan is underscoring here is the role of imagination. When he's writing, he's using his imagination. And when you think about imagination, everything around us, just look everything around you. Just take a time, look, everything around you was at one point imagination. And we made imagination into something real. So when we look at the theorem of totality, what it's sort of saying is that everything imaginable exists. So in some ways, there's an infinite number of yous. There's all these things happening. And the question is, how do we access that? How do we make what we imagine real? Or how do we access it in some other way? So there's a real connection between imagination and reality. You might think of science as really the materialization of the imaginative. What we think of as science. And this imagination is always growing and becoming materialized in different ways.
And imagination has been the great conundrum between like the divine spark of creation has been bringing what it is you've learned in that state and actually bringing it down from that state into this physical plane that we exist in. And that's been the great challenge where creatives have really excelled and become what they are to civilization. They're able, anybody can go out in the desert and not eat for several days and have incredible visions and commune with things beyond comprehension. But how do you then bring that back with you and apply it to your life, right? So
pretty hard. And I think
yeah, so
it's so hard that that what we can imagine is limited by our history, by our personality, by our cultural biases, so that what we can imagine is always sort of limited. I mean, if you're living thousands of years ago and you saw an airplane, you would think it was a bird. That's how you would interpret it, and you wouldn't know that it's a plane. And that's people who had visions of let's say the spiritual world in some way during the medieval ages would see Jesus or devils or angels. Now we don't see those anymore. We see other things. We see UFOs. We see aliens.
It's about that vocabulary, right? Like
Well, it's all about what we project onto things, because we have to make sense of things. And because we have to make sense of things, we use our history, our knowledge, and we project it onto these phenomena, which really are kind of outside of that knowledge. And we make it then conform to that knowledge. So this is why people have very differing interpretations of all kinds of extraordinary phenomena. One person will say it's this, another person will say it's that. And people then get into fighting about the interpretations rather than that, well, actually an experience did occur, but how we interpret it is very different. There are lots of different ways of accessing, let's say, non-ordinary experiences or other dimensions. And there are some very traditional ways like meditation, where if you meditate, I mean, if you get into Tibetan Buddhists are, wild meditators where they're in, many different kinds of worlds, and there's different kinds of blue Buddhas and green Buddhas. And they're, anyways, they get into all kinds of interesting kind of dimensions, and you can do through meditation. And then obviously another way is through drugs. I mean, that's another way people kind of access other alternative realities, though we have to remember that we're accessing, we're being influenced by the drug in some way. So the drug is somehow affecting how we think. And again, what we experience can be very different. You have somebody who's, belongs to some kind of gang and is doing some psychedelic, their experience could be very different from somebody who has a very deep intention, spiritual or kind of humanitarian intention. Their experience could be very different, using the same drug. So drugs don't necessarily make people more enlightened.
I know exactly what you're saying.
The intentionality is important.
Oh yeah, the setting, mindset.
You've read. I'm guessing you've read How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah, I got a little experience in this realm, but
for sure. Washington State.
Yeah, we're Washington. Yeah, I believe in the healing potential of these things if used properly.
Yeah,
and as much as big government organizations don't necessarily see it that way.
Well, there's a few years back, I was at the American Psychological Association's conference, their yearly conference. This is about 3 or 4 years ago, I think. Anyways, the rage at the conference was psychedelics. And the data is incredible of how powerful they are and how transformative they can be in, 1 or 2 sessions. Really far, just incredible, people who have had PTSD, chronic PTSD or depression, and they're not just the symptoms are reduced, they're cured. It's a pretty amazing, and the literature is only getting larger and larger. The evidence is pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I've seen too. Certain things like ibogaine and other stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with any. I mean, yeah, it's incredible. This is one thing I'd like to see if I'm grasping your monograph right, just to kind of change directions a bit. Am I correct in because when I read it, I got so are you suggesting that maybe someone's life could be improved by embracing uncertainty and incompleteness in their lives rather than only focusing on certainty and knowing, which I think you might have referred to as like the root of all evil or something? Maybe I've
yeah. Well, it's sort of. I think certainty is a delusion, or can be a delusion or an illusion. And when we, curiosity is a sense of thinking that the world is incomplete. There's things to discover. And so we evolve by being uncertain. If we're certain, then we don't change. So if you want to evolve as a human being, if you want to really connect with others, you need to open yourself up and be vulnerable. And to become vulnerable is to admit your insufficiencies, is to be, and also to be somewhat humble, is to realize, yeah, there's things I just don't know, I don't understand. But by doing that, you open yourselves up to making more connections, and through those connections with others, maybe we build better communities, maybe we build better connections. The negative emotions that are just rampaging in our, in our society, hatred and anger, all these negative of fear, tremendous, these all contract us. They contract our perceptions. They lead to us dehumanizing the other person. We reduce them to something, to whatever our negative thing is. Whereas positive emotions expand and allow us then to connect in many other ways than we would know how. So yeah, I would say that, yeah, the completeness is pretty important with that.
So just to double check,
Sure.
are negative emotions connected to certainty?
No, I wouldn't say they're negative emotions are important because we need to think critically. So negative emotions help us know there's something wrong.
Okay.
So if I'm afraid or I'm angry, sad, that means there's something wrong, and there probably may be something wrong that needs to be corrected. So having the ability to think negatively is very important. One of the first developmental milestones for a child is to be able to say no. That's why little kids say no, because
I have a 1.5-year-old right
no,
now. It's his favorite word.
Yeah, no. By saying no, they learn to separate themselves, their sense of self, from others. And they begin to realize, oh, I have an interior world that nobody knows, that I can say no, so this ability to say no enables us then to be more critical and to develop things. People who are great reformers engage in critical thinking all the time. I mean, that's what makes our society, that's what makes civilization grow and develop. So negative feelings have their place. The problem is when they become chronic. So when you become chronically depressed, chronically angry, chronically fearful, that's then leads to, I think, very deleterious results.
Good word.
Part of me thinks that, do you think it is somewhat like almost a human condition to have the desire for certainty? And is that a bad thing? Because you can even apply it to your case. People want to know what happened.
Oh yeah, yes.
They want to know. They need
yeah.
certainty. They do not like the uncertainty of not
we don't,
knowing.
because it makes us feel insecure. It takes a certain amount of training to feel okay with insecurity, with not knowing, with the unknown. And we have, when we're real, when you think of children are very open to the unknown. They're very open to insecurity. They're very open to not knowing things and learning things. I think it's because we get pummeled, we get harmed so much, we get so much negativity and judgment about us that we become fearful of the unknown. We become fearful of even discovery, and we move to certainty. But I think certainty is ultimately an illusion. And when you think about people who are evil, I've never met, when I read about the people who are evil in the world historically, or even now, they always have this overwhelming sense of absolute certainty and righteousness, that they know better than everyone else. And they're going to make everybody do what they want them to do, regardless of what they might want to do. So, I find certainty to be a very dangerous sort of
And
way of being
oftentimes,
in the world.
isn't it in the case of like your case, Steve, or any unsolved case that you've probably covered on your show, it's like there's the idea of certainty is maybe more important to people than actual certainty. Like cases like Steve's thrive because they allow for people to explore possibilities, to open themselves up. You know, anytime you're missing a definitive answer, it does allow you to explore possibilities. And like you mentioned earlier, project, you know, your own creativity, your own worldview onto, and see, you know, is this a possibility that might make you feel a positive emotion about something that you actually have no connection to, like another person's missing person's case, you know? And so like when you look at all of the different theories about what happened to Steve, what you're seeing are people expressing their desire for certainty,
Well,
but not.
I think that we need to make a difference between certainty and knowledge. I think we all want to know
Mm,
more. We all want more knowledge, and gaining knowledge is, I think, fantastic. We should know more. We should discover. We should figure things out. We should, you know, that I think is that's what makes the human species so successful, and creates incredible, beautiful art, and everything that's beautiful about our world and about human beings. But that's kind of when we think of learning and knowledge, we're always expanding. We don't reach any form of any end point of certainty. So when we think we're certain, certainty stops learning. Certainty stops the acquisition of more knowledge.
right.
So I think what Dylan is
That's what
saying,
I mean. It's like they want more knowledge. They want a more nuanced understanding of reality. Wherein a reality where seemingly a person can just disappear means that there is now a hole in their understanding of what's even possible, and they would like to fill that hole with some sort of
course, and they should.
knowledge.
And they should be able to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I mean, if I look at Stephen's case, it's not necessarily that the fact that he disappeared. It is the details of the circumstances around the disappearance, the footprints that seemingly lead to nowhere on the ice. You know, it seems from the outside like this could possibly be a breaking of the boundaries of reality or something, and so people are drawn to that because they want to gain that knowledge. You know, is this real?
The knowledge, yes.
Right. I could see that.
No,
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and I think that's good. It's a good thing.
I agree.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that clears up a question, because I had a little cheeky question I was going to ask you about the book, you know, about, you know, if certainty is the root of all evil, are you contributing to the root of all evil by publishing this book and giving someone certainty?
Well, I don't know. It's not.
But that's knowledge, maybe. I don't know.
Well, you know, the book will lead to, you know, some interesting information that may then lead to other information. So
it's so hard not to.
There's no finality about the book. The book is opening more doors, not closing doors.
There you go. Yeah,
okay. That's
there you
beautiful.
go.
Well said. I like that. We're going over an hour now, so I promised I'd keep you around an hour. Maybe I'll call this the lightning question second. I got a few questions for you guys. Just a quick answer, and then we'll be done. I got a few for both of you, and they're meant to be kind of fun. Steven, were you a big Dungeons and Dragons guy back in the day?
Never.
I was into unbelievable.
I was into Tolkien. I used to hang out with people. We had Tolkien hoods and staves and the whole 9 yards.
The long pipe.
Oh, that's
Lord
awesome.
Of the Rings. Lord of the Rings. And I even know it in German.
Really?
Awesome. Ja, drei Ringen, den Elbenkönigen hocken lieg, 7 den Zwergen herrschen in Hallen aus Stein, einen den dunklen Herren und dunklen Thron, in Lande Mordor, wo die Schatten drohen.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, the Lord of the Rings in German is even more magical than in English.
I bet it's way more epic.
It's scary. Yeah.
All right. Foiled again on that one, but Tolkien. Dylan, is it hard to keep a big secret?
Yeah. It is.
Um,
It's tough. But luckily it's been easy. It's easier to keep a big secret when you know someday you'll be able to speak about it and be proud of contributing to its story being told.
Steven, what's your favorite hiking location?
Are you gonna really spill
Well,
the beans?
I would say in the Mount Rainier is pretty good, but there's some places around North Bend I like to go hiking.
Okay.
Nice and vague. Nice. Keep
Yeah,
it vague.
nice. A little vague.
You know, I don't want.
He's not giving away the goods.
Suddenly, you know, thousands of people got some trail.
Waiting for you.
You know, they're what? What did
Fair
he do?
point.
He's
Fair
doing our
point. All
trail.
right. Yeah. Mislead them a bit. I got you. Good
There
idea. Dylan, what's your favorite conspiracy theory of the fun kind?
Probably the ancient astronaut theory, because it was the first time that my mom gave me Chariot of the Gods, and it was when I read it, I suddenly knew a side of my mother that I did not know, because she's not that person, professionally, publicly, all these things, and yet she had that book, first printing of it, the original. And it opened me up to the idea that there could be people who walk around, pay their taxes, and hold professional jobs, and are pillars of their community, yet also leave a little space in their internal world, to borrow a phrase from Steve, to look at the pyramids and go, what if? Just what if, you know?
Like that. All right, final question for Steven. Have you ever run in the Pavo Nurmi Marathon?
The what?
Have you ever run in the Pavo Nurmi Marathon?
Where's that?
Pavo Nurmi.
That answers the question right there. Thank you. That
Okay.
is a solid.
Where is it? What marathon is that?
Pavo.
Wisconsin.
Pavo
I believe it's in
Oh,
Wisconsin.
I was thinking
Pavo,
Europe with
Pavo.
Pavo.
What?
Okay, I'll explain this to you. So,
No, I don't. I have no idea what that marathon is. Sorry.
Okay, well that's perfect. I don't know. I bring it up because there's this theory out here that, and I go through it in my video, that you woke up wearing a Pavo Nurmi Marathon shirt, and that the idea is that when you were missing, maybe you ran in that marathon, and that's why you were wearing that shirt. And I even got the list of participants, and you're not on there, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
It's a good theory.
It's a good theory.
And you got the list of participants of this random. That's pretty good stuff.
There's
that's
a Kubacki on there, but it's not him.
Oh.
Well, your viewers should appreciate. That's some good, that's like gumshoeing.
I can't take credit.
I mean,
for it. A journalist did it before me. I just duplicated their findings. Basically.
Okay,
But
hey,
it is a great idea.
I was pitching you a low and slow. You were supposed to nail that one right out of the park, dude.
All right. Anything else you guys want to add at all? I mean, your book's going to be coming out. I'll keep people updated. Maybe we'll do this again when you're.
Yeah.
Are you guys making the rounds right now? Doing other interviews, or?
We might be doing one or two more. It hasn't been clear. Yeah, but I appreciate. I really have enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
You've been a great host, and it's actually been a great pleasure talking to you.
It is nice to finally be able to say a little bit about it.
Right. Yeah, not everything though.
Not everything.
We'll get there. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I guess we'll end it there. And yeah, thank you so much, you guys.